Have you ever stepped into a courtroom only to realize the trial isn't about truth but loyalty? What if the judge had already written the ending before you even spoke? Today, we follow Pam Bondi as she walks into a legal trap disguised as justice, and flips the entire script. This isn't just a hearing, it's a reckoning. Let's find out how one voice exposed the system. At 6:21 a.m., Pam Bondi's phone lit up. No caller ID, no emojis, just a single sterile sentence. It's not a hearing, it's a setup. Guess who's directing? She read it twice, then a third time, barefoot on the cool tile floor of her Philadelphia brownstone kitchen. Pam stood still. Outside, the city hadn't woken up yet, but someone had already lit the fuse. There was no need to guess. She knew exactly who was directing. Only one name carried that much legal theater and political perfume. Judge Tanya Chutkin, the same judge who made her mark not by measuring law, but by measuring loyalty, a jurist whose sense of neutrality had the sharp edge of a guillotine. She didn't just preside, she performed. And if your values rhymed with Florida or 2020, God help you. Pam exhaled slowly and leaned on the kitchen counter. No coffee yet, just silence. But the kind of silence that makes your spine stand up before your eyes are fully open. A pre-folded government envelope sat on the table. Notice of administrative contempt. The heading read, a glorified wrist slap. So, they wanted her to think, $1,200 fine. Optional reprimand. Optional, not in Chutkin's courtroom. Optional meant, we'll see how well you beg. She opened the envelope again. No crime, no complaint, just lateness, 7 minutes late to a procedural appearance the week prior. But in DC these days, lateness wasn't a time issue, it was a trigger. Pam had seen enough of these setups to know, in the Capitol, no paper was just paper. Behind every stamp, there was a message. Behind every memo, a motive. And this one wasn't whispering, it was screaming. She glanced at the time again. She had exactly 90 minutes until she'd walk into the lion's den. But this wasn't about delay. This was about disruption. She had been inconvenient to too many people for too long. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't anonymous. Today's the day, said a voice she knew, an insider, still buried. Deep in the DOJ, they're going for the funds. Retroactive legal defense accounts tied to Trump's Circle Navarro Meadows. And yes, you. Pam didn't even blink. Let me guess, she said, sliding her blazer off the hook. Chutkin's name is on page 1. Top line. The voice confirmed it. Then silence. No goodbye, no good luck. There was no time for pleasantries. Not when due process was being dressed in costume. Pam straightened her jacket. She wasn't walking into a courtroom today. She was walking onto a set. The lights were already up, the script already written, and they expected her to read her lines. She smiled faintly, then whispered to herself, let's rewrite the scene. She sat in the back of the SUV, seatbelt buckled, coffee untouched. The government-issued envelope rested in her lap like a paper-thin guillotine. Violation. Administrative contempt. The phrase sounded harmless, enough like a parking ticket from hell. Except in Pam Bondi's world, nothing mailed from a federal courthouse ever arrived without weight and purpose. The fine, $1,200. The offense, tardiness. The catch, optional reprimand. In Washington speak, optional translated to, we'll see how useful it is to humiliate you on camera. Her fingers tightened around the folder. The document was crisp, bureaucratic, and suspiciously vague. No mention of prior warnings. No procedural breakdown, just a one-line citation that placed her 7 minutes late to a calendar hearing. 7 minutes. And yet the stakes felt seismic. Her driver turned off Market Street, and Pam leaned back, eyes scanning the names on her phone's contact list, not to call, just to confirm. She knew she wasn't alone. And that, ironically, was what made it worse. 2 years ago, defending a client in federal court meant advocating law. Now it meant surviving politics. Her phone rang again. Same unlisted number. Same familiar voice. Urgent, and laced with fatigue. It's not just you, he said. They've pulled in 6 others this week, all tied to post-election legal work. Pam didn't interrupt. She knew to let him talk. Legal defense funds, that's the play. Retroactive targeting. They're going after anyone who drafted, advised, or even reviewed a memo for Trump after November 2020. Navarro interns are getting flagged. Chutkin, she asked flatly. Top of the chain. She's been lit. This isn't about court protocol, it's about kneecapping what's left of the resistance. Pam nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the outline of the courthouse in the distance. You said 6 others, she murmured. Give me names. He listed them off: 3 former DOJ officials, a private practice attorney from Arizona, a clerk from a Michigan election integrity group, a Florida law professor who wrote a legal blog post they didn't like. All had received administrative violation notices in the past 10 days. None had been formally charged with anything, but that wasn't the point. The point was the optics. Paper trails designed to whisper doubt. Legal process as political punishment. Pam's mind shifted gears. She tapped her laptop open, fingers flying across keys, pulling up open court dockets and recent filings. There it was, case number 2 for AC 1765, filed in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Judge of record, Tanya Chutkin. Classification, administrative contempt, appearance delay. Penalty up to $1,500 plus court reprimand. She scanned a history, no pretrial conference logged. No preliminary notification. They didn't want to warn her, they wanted to catch her. They wanted her off balance, on camera, and unprepared. A headline already halfway written. Trump-era official sanctioned for ignoring court. Neat, clean, deceptive. That's the formula now, she thought. Dress the ambush in paperwork, wrap suppression in a legal envelope, then pretend it's all due process. Pam closed the laptop, eyes narrowing as the SUV slowed in front of the courthouse steps. A small gathering of local reporters milled near the front entrance, their badges flipped over, their eyes already scanning the black SUVs. She didn't flinch, she just adjusted her collar. Get ready, she said to no one in particular. This isn't a hearing, it's a performance review. The driver opened her door. The air outside was brisk, tinged with pre-rain electricity and the subtle tension of an incoming storm. As she stepped onto the pavement, a breeze swept past, lifting the edges of her coat. But Pam held her footing because she knew something they didn't. They weren't summoning her to face justice. They were summoning her to break quietly, efficiently, legally. But she had no intention of playing along. She didn't come to beg. She came to bring the camera something they weren't expecting. Not a defendant, a whistleblower. And as she crossed the threshold of the courthouse, her heels echoed like a countdown. Tick, 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 showtime. The federal courthouse loomed over Market Street like a stone monument to power. As Pam stepped through its steel-framed doors, the scent of floor polish and cold marble hit her harder than the air outside. She wasn't late by any human measure, 6 minutes behind schedule due to a classified briefing from a DOJ contact. But in this building, run by ideological clocks, 6 minutes was more than enough to paint a target. Security didn't blink as she passed. No murmurs, no fanfare, just a former attorney general walking into a courtroom that already had its verdict written. Courtroom 3B smelled like fresh paper and stale narratives. The rows were filled not with journalists or law students, but with staffers in well-pressed suits and screens already recording subtle but not hidden. The type of audience that didn't need a verdict, they came for a performance. And center stage sat Judge Tanya Chutkin, draped in black robes that looked ceremonial, not judicial. Her posture was precise, her hands folded with theatrical calm, but the sharp glint in her eyes gave it away. She wasn't waiting for justice. She was waiting for a line. And Pam had just walked into her scene. Miss Bondi, Chutkin announced, without even looking up, her voice slicing through the courtroom like a cold front. Nice of you to join us. This isn't Fox News. A few gasps, a couple stifled smirks. The court reporter's fingers hovered midair for a beat long enough to capture the insult before pressing on. Pam said nothing. She walked calmly to the defendant's desk, unbuttoning her coat with the same precision she used to dismantle corrupt mayors back in Florida. She laid down her folder, only a few sheets inside, but it carried more weight than the judge's gavel. And everyone knew it. Not 30 minutes before Pam arrived, another name had been called in that same courtroom. Rick Alvarez, former strategic advisor to the DNC and a regular guest on progressive podcasts. He'd strolled in nearly 20 minutes late, sipping an overpriced cold brew and offering a generic excuse about a security delay. Chutkin had nodded gently, dismissed it with a smile, and allowed him to take his seat unscathed. No fine, no remarks, no disdain. But when Pam 6 minutes late, burdened with a federal memo in hand, entered, Chutkin's entire body shifted forward, her voice tightening with glee, masked as order. This court considers tardiness a form of contempt, she said flatly. And given your background, Miss Bondi, I trust you understand what contempt looks like. Pam didn't flinch, not because she was unmoved, but because she had seen this game before. Contempt wasn't about clocks, it was about affiliations. Your Honor, Pam said, her voice steady and uncaffeinated. My apologies for the delay. I was responding to an internal federal alert regarding unlawful interference with legal defense operations, an issue this court may soon find itself obligated to review. Her tone didn't rise, but it landed like a flat palm across a smug face. The gallery shifted slightly, the silence broken only by the soft clack of a bailiff's step and the quiet, eager blink of a phone camera in the back row. Perhaps, Pam continued, next time, I should just bring a latte and a DNC badge. Someone coughed. Someone else stifled a laugh. The clerk looked up, then quickly looked back down again. Chutkin's jaw clenched, but her voice stayed syrupy. You're towing the line, Miss Bondi. Pam finally looked up fully. I'm not towing anything, Your Honor. I'm standing exactly where the Constitution permits me. The temperature in the room dropped a degree, not in weather but in posture. Every head in the room not yet swiveled was now listening, because the real drama wasn't in the insult, it was in the restraint. Pam didn't come here to grandstand. She came here to expose the stage itself. Chutkin leaned back, laced her fingers, and gave the kind of smile judges reserve for people they intend to punish politely. Let's be clear, she said. This is not a campaign stop. This is a court of law. Pam nodded slowly. Then I trust the law will be applied as written and not as interpreted through partisanship. The pause that followed wasn't planned, it was organic attention you couldn't script, like a drumbeat before a reveal, because in that moment, the whole courtroom realized something. This wasn't a defendant trying to dodge responsibility. This was a former prosecutor, turning the lens, and people started paying attention. A young staffer in the back slowly adjusted their phone's angle just enough to capture both Pam and the projection screen behind her, because what came next wasn't a monologue, it was a reckoning. Pam reached into her folder, pulled out a single page, and placed it gently on the table. She didn't need theatrics. She had something better. Receipts. For the record, she said calmly, I would like to submit this document. It's a timeline confirming that I was in a classified session regarding judicial overreach during the exact window in question. Chutkin didn't even glance down. The court is not obligated to consider justifications for lateness. Pam raised an eyebrow. Even when that justification involves interference in active legal defense funds being targeted based on political affiliation. Chutkin's gavel hovered, undecided. This court, she said sharply, is not a venue for conspiracy theories. Pam tilted her head. Then perhaps you should ask why only one side of the political aisle seems to get sanctioned for being 7 minutes late. A murmur spread through the rows, small, controlled, but undeniable. Even the bailiff shifted slightly, glancing toward the screen. No one spoke, but someone hit record on it to capture drama, to capture truth. Pam Bondi wasn't there to delay a hearing, she was there to delay a lie, and as she folded her arms, eyes locked on Chutkin, a thought crossed the room, like a silent current. This isn't just about one woman being punished. This is about a system being exposed one gavel tap at a time. Pam didn't raise her voice, she didn't pound the table. She simply turned her eyes to the clerk and said 6 words that changed the temperature of the courtroom. Please pull up the sanction log. The clerk hesitated, not out of defiance, but recognition. Recognition that this request was about to ignite something irreversible. Judge Chutkin blinked. Miss Bondi, this is not a discovery hearing. No, Your Honor, Pam replied calmly. This is a truth hearing. The gallery stilled. The bailiff leaned subtly toward the bench, not to intervene, but because his instincts told him something important was happening, and not from the judge. Pam stepped forward and placed a USB drive on the clerk's desk. This is a DOJ request. I submitted last week 6 months' worth of administrative sanctions issued from this courthouse. If we're going to penalize people for being late, let's be sure the punishment is blind. Chutkin didn't object, but her stillness said more than words. She leaned back, one finger tapping rhythmically against her robe. The clerk inserted the drive. The projector in the corner hummed to life, casting a cold light across the room. The screen blinked blue, then snapped into view. Administrative sanctions, Eastern District of Pennsylvania, reporting period, past 6 months. Total administrative sanction cases 73. Breakdown by political affiliation as listed in DOJ filings and campaign disclosures. Republican affiliated or Trumpling defendants, 68 sanctioned. Progressive NGO defendants, 0 excused or no action. Other affiliations, 5 minor warnings issued. Pam didn't say a word. She let the numbers breathe, let the silence settle in like a cold front, and then she added the final cut. She clicked the remote again, switching to the next slide. A name appeared. Rick Alvarez, former strategic advisor DNC, court appearance, 20 minutes late. Judicial response: no cause for penalty. Warning verbally dismissed. Judge of record: Tanya Chutkin. Someone gasped. Someone else cursed under their breath. The tension wasn't noisy. It was seismic, the kind of shift you don't hear but feel under your feet. Judge Chutkin's face remained impassive, but her fingers had stopped tapping. Pam finally turned toward her. Your Honor, this isn't conjecture. This is arithmetic. Chutkin's voice dropped half a tone. Statistics can be interpreted in many ways, Miss Bondi. Pam raised her chin slightly. Sure, so can fairy tales. But only one of them fines people $1,200 for being 6 minutes late if they voted the wrong way. The screen behind her stayed lit, facts in bold font. Proof that didn't sweat, didn't blink, and didn't care about resumes. The judge shifted again, but this time, she wasn't leading. She was reacting. Pam reached back into her folder and pulled out a printed email. One more item. Your Honor, this was leaked to my team 2 days ago. An internal communication from this court's administrative office. She read aloud. As of the 10th of January, we've been directed to automatically flag and penalize individuals with known GOP affiliations for any administrative violations. Discretion to be minimized for optics purposes. She paused, letting the words settle like dust after a demolition. Flag, penalize, optics. She held the paper higher, her voice calm but surgical. This isn't enforcement, this is theater. And we all just found out who's writing the script. A ripple of awareness moved through the courtroom. The gallery, once passive, now felt like a jury, watching not Pam but Chutkin. From the back row, a young man adjusted his phone. Its red recording dot blinked steadily, pointed squarely at the screen. The timestamp read 9:42 a.m. A former Marine, now working courthouse security, shifted his stance near the rear doors. Not act, just to stand straighter. It was subtle but loaded. Pam lowered the email. Let me be very clear, she said. I didn't come here to argue lateness. I came here to reveal bias. She turned again to face the judge. If justice only applies to the favored, it's not justice. It's factionalism in a black robe. Chutkin finally spoke, her voice tighter than velvet stretched over wire. You are politicizing the judiciary, she accused. Pam leaned forward. No, I'm depoliticizing it by exposing what it's become. The clerk stopped typing. A gray-haired man near the front adjusted his glasses, his eyes wide. A woman in a legal aid blazer clutched her notepad but didn't write. The room had shifted, not in noise, but in truth. Pam folded the memo and placed it back in her folder. No drama, no fireworks, just precision. Chutkin reached for her gavel, but didn't strike it. And that was the moment everyone realized she couldn't not without looking like the headline Pam had just written in real time. A truth now made visible. Bias now undeniable. And the judge now finally judged. The silence in courtroom 3B was no longer one of order. It was one of reckoning. You could feel it in the way people sat straighter, how eyes darted, not toward the judge, but toward the screen, the numbers, the memo, the undeniable math of it all. And then, without warning or permission, a man rose. He wasn't young. His suit was worn, mismatched at the shoulders, his tie a decade out of date. But he stood tall, proud, like a flag that had seen storms and refused to fall. His left hand trembled slightly as he held up a yellowed slip of paper. 2 years ago, he said, his voice gravelly with age and defiance, I was fined $300 for showing up 5 minutes late to this courthouse. I told the clerk it was because I had just come from my chemotherapy session. They told me, you people need to learn accountability. He turned and looked directly at Judge Chutkin. I didn't know then what you people really meant. Now I do. No one stopped him. No bailiff moved. The judge didn't try to silence the man because, in that moment, every second he spoke told a deeper truth than any court transcript. And then a second voice rose, a woman in her mid-30s, confident, controlled, but with fire smoldering behind her restraint. Her bar card hung from her lapel, a licensed attorney in 3 states. Your Honor, she said, addressing the bench with the cold precision of a professional who had swallowed enough injustice to know exactly how it tasted. I've stood before you. I've watched colleagues, brilliant, principled lawyers, walk out of this courtroom in tears, not because they lost their case, but because they never had a chance to argue it. She turned now, not to the judge, but to the room. We're not allowed to argue. We're trained to accept defeat. We prep our apologies instead of our opening statements because the outcome was decided before the hearing date was even assigned. Her voice didn't crack. It cut. Someone in the back row whispered, she's right. Another nodded. The Energy was no longer passive, it was kinetic. And somewhere in that sea of faces, a hand moved. A young man, barely out of college, flipped his phone vertical and pressed send. 37 seconds of footage. Pam's calm confrontation, the glowing numbers on the screen, the email read aloud word for word, the silent courtroom, the shifting posture of a once impeccable judge. The clip hit Twitter in minutes, TikTok. In less than 10, within an hour, Courtroom Bias and Justice Hijacked were trending top 10 nationally. Conservative creators remixed the footage with hard-hitting trap beats and side-by-side comparisons of other lateness cases, complete with smiling progressives and stoic conservatives walking out of the same courthouse under different outcomes. But it wasn't just the right who noticed. Even legal scholars on centrist blogs began posting frame-by-frame breakdowns of the sanctions data. The bias is no longer anecdotal, one wrote. It's systemic. It's statistically evident, and now it's public in the courtroom. The wave of awakening didn't feel loud. It felt grounded, like a courtroom that had finally been unplugged from the illusion of neutrality. Judge Chutkin sat frozen, gavel still untouched. For the first time in the entire hearing, she wasn't the focal point. She was the subject. Her face now appeared in screenshots overlaid with quotes. She had spoken lines that once felt dismissive, now rippled with double standards. Pam didn't speak again. She didn't have to. She had done what few ever managed inside a federal courtroom. She broke the fourth wall. She made the audience realize they were part of the scene and part of the solution. And as one final voice called out an older woman in the gallery, soft but unmistakable, whispering, "This ends today," it became clear that the hearing had shifted. It was no longer just a summons. It was a spark, a signal flare, a final straw, a mirror held up to the system. And the system didn't like what it saw. By the time the court adjourned, the story had already left the room. It wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It was a movement. On Capitol Hill, the shift was immediate. The House Judiciary Committee, previously dismissive of courtroom bias claims, announced a formal inquiry into patterns of ideological targeting within the federal bench. The headlines hit within hours: Congress launches judicial integrity investigation following courtroom controversy. But this time, it wasn't just press, it was policy. Within 2 weeks, a bipartisan draft emerged. The Judicial Integrity and Transparency Act. 3 pages, 3 simple demands. First, a total ban on political expression by sitting federal judges across public and private platforms. No more blogs, no partisan LinkedIn rants. The robe meant silence, not slogans. Second, mandatory publication of all judicial disciplinary records, every sanction, every internal memo, made available to the public. No more quiet reprimands buried in bureaucracy. And third, the formation of a permanent citizen-led oversight board not composed of politicians, not filtered through legal elites, just regular Americans, teachers, veterans, doctors, business owners. If judges serve the people, then it was time the people had a way to hold them accountable. The legal establishment scoffed at first, but public pressure, fueled by millions of views and non-stop social media momentum, made ignoring the reform impossible. What began with one USB drive had triggered a systemic audit, and at the center of it all, Judge Tanya Chutkin was suspended pending review. No bench appearances, no rulings, just a short statement from the Office of Judicial Conduct citing credible patterns of partiality, abuse of discretion, and politically motivated sanctioning. She didn't offer a public defense, but in a rare moment of silence, even her supporters struggled to spin the numbers, because numbers don't apologize, and truth doesn't backpedal. Meanwhile, in her modest office above a downtown law library, Pam Bondi hung a simple black frame on the wall. Inside, a printed receipt for $1,200, paid to the U.S. District Court. Citation: administrative contempt. Beneath it, a handwritten line in permanent ink: "I paid the fine." They paid the price. It was never about the money. It was about the message. Weeks later, Pam stepped onto a stage at George Washington University Law School, not as a partisan, not as a media figure, but as a woman who refused to kneel. The auditorium was packed. Students, professors, reporters. Some came out of curiosity, others out of admiration. All of them left changed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't deliver a rallying cry. She just said one line: "Justice doesn't lean left or right. It stands tall." And with that, she walked off stage. No theatrics, just truth. In the audience, a group of second-year law students huddled after the speech. By the end of the week, they launched Civic Bench Watch, an independent grassroots watchdog network to monitor courtroom bias nationwide. No sponsors, No donors, just laptops, coffee, and a shared belief that fairness wasn't negotiable. Their motto, we don't care what side you're on. If you bend the law for politics, we'll straighten the record. And now the question is yours. If justice starts picking sides, who holds the gavel accountable? If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe more people should hear stories like this. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand.